We're ready. We're ready.
All right, good evening, everyone. I will call the November 13th, 2023 meeting of the Newtown Township Board of Supervisors to order. I apologize for us being tardy, but the board was in executive session where we discussed 3 zoning litigation matters, 4031 Westchester Pike, where the owner is seeking a variance to allow for a commercial sign to be placed at the property, which is currently zoned as a residential property. 41 Radnor Drive, where the owner is requesting relief to build an addition within the side yard setback. 606 Tennis Avenue, the owner is requesting relief to expand their driveway and build an attached garage within the side yard and rear yard setbacks. 3530 Goshen Road, where the applicant is requesting relief to place a safety fence on the front of the property. With that being said, Mr. Neese, please call the roll. Here.
Sorry, Mr. Altieri,
Here.
Ms. Roberts Lightcap,
Here.
Mr. Partridge.
Here.
Mr. Russo,
Here.
Ms. Chanlis.
Here.
Your solicitor, engineer, and manager are here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Neese. We'll now move down to section 4, which is the moment of silence. I will ask that everybody during this moment of silence remembers our veterans, those brave women and men who put the uniform on and have served our country. And now we'll stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And speaking of Veterans Day, I think it would be fitting if we said a special thank you to our solicitor, Mr. Sikora, who spent a couple of decades in the Army and the National Guard. So thank you for that. Thank you. And of course, Lieutenant Colonel Larry Fisher from the Finance Committee, United States Air Force. There he is. Okay, now we'll move down to section 5, agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Motion was made by Supervisor Russo, seconded by Supervisor Roberts Lightcap. Is there any board discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion carries unanimously. We'll now move down to section 6, public comment for agenda items only. If there's any members of the public who have anything to provide with regards to public comment on any agenda item, please come up to the podium, state your name and address for the record. Let the record reflect there is no public comment. We'll now move down to section 7, minutes, 7.1. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes from the October 23rd, 2023 meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion was made by Supervisor Roberts Lightcap, seconded by Supervisor Chanlis. Is there any board discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion carries unanimously. Section 8, presentations, 8.1, stormwater presentation by the Finance Committee. Mr. Nabholz, floor is yours, sir.
Good evening, Ed Nabholz, 92 Roberts Road, Chairperson of the Finance Committee, Newtown Township. Thank you for giving us a few minutes tonight. The Finance Committee took up the task of looking at and investigating from information that's available, how to come up with a financing plan, what would be possible arrangements. Goes back to the Stantec projection that was November 2021. The $8.5 million projection. From that, we worked off of that. Obviously, I've spent a considerable amount of time back and forth debating many issues. We've come up with a recommendation that we've provided to you. We decided, given the magnitude of the numbers that are involved, we would just use as a baseline $1 million. What will it take to generate $1 million of revenue in order to continue to fund what we've called flood control as compared to stormwater, and I'm going to double back on that in a minute. What we're looking at is the distinction between, as Alex Sukas has enlightened us, stormwater being where an existing property is developed and the development increases impervious coverage, which causes more runoff, as compared to all properties that will have runoff when there are heavy rains, regardless of the type of ground, whether or not it's natural ground or whether or not it's impervious coverage. What we're more geared towards is not stormwater per se, because any type of construction that will increase impervious coverage will have stormwater controls built into whatever is required in order to get the approval for that particular property. It's more of the flood control of what exists right now and the flooding that occurs in the public streets and the other public areas. And that's really what we're trying to address in terms of the financing directed toward that particular issue. Just looking at it, if you've got parcels, equivalent parcels, half-acre parcels that are vacant land, in our particular recommendation, they're going to pay the same fee if they're of equivalent size. If one parcel is developed, they're going to pay the same fee as the undeveloped. You can kind of get into, well, is that fair? Is that equitable? Is the flood control the same for those two properties? Then it gets more complicated. What about if you look at a residential property that has a house that's developed as compared to a commercial property, and they're both an acre, to say, for example. Commercial property is probably going to be 98% impervious coverage. So should it be fair that commercial property pays the same as the residential property? We did not try and even attempt to get down to how do you resolve and come out with an equitable formula to address that. It's a complex problem many of the municipalities are wrestling with. The recommendation that we put forth, I believe you have in your materials. I don't really need to read it verbatim. I think it's fairly straightforward. In terms of how does this fall on the township? If we impose the township, the supervisors decide to go ahead with a plan, independent of what the number is, just as an aside. When we looked at this, our estimate, good estimate, but estimate, is that approximately 40% of the parcels in the township are going to fall into the 0 to 25 quarter acre size. So it would be one fee of $45. That would represent about 40% of the parcels in the township, give or take. If you say, okay, well, what about if we move into half acre? That will come up to roughly about 60% of the taxable parcels in the township would fall into either quarter acre or the half acre. And the rest obviously remaining would be above that. So you could kind of get a vision of where this particular fee, and I'll get back to that in a second, where it would fall and on whom it would fall and how would that be received appropriately within the township. We also talked about the issue of should this revenue generation be a tax, real estate tax, an increase in the real estate tax, or should it be a fee? And if it be a fee, well, what's the distinction? We all know that the legalities of the issue of a fee versus a tax. But what we were really looking for was an opportunity for township residents to actually see the issue, to understand the issue, rather than embed a number in the existing real estate millage rate. We wanted it to stand out so that it can be addressed, that people will come out, that people will ask about what is this? Why is this happening? So we'll have a fair chance in order to move forward and adequately explain it, rather than just another tax increase. We recommended the Finance Committee that it be a newly created fund that would preserve the integrity and the accounting for the monies that are generated. We thought that would be very important. And then obviously we have, at last count, we have roughly 66 parcel owners in the township that are tax exempt. So, and some of them are obviously fairly large, and some of them contribute significantly to the flood control problem. So those are issues that I think have to be addressed one-on-one with those particular folks. and stop here. Any questions right away up front?
Any questions from the board? All right, keep going, Mr. Naples.
All right. We went with the fee and we went with on the size of the parcel because it can be done administratively, it can done fairly straightforward without a lot of complexity. Obviously, my example earlier about impervious versus non-impervious coverage, you bump up against that classical equity argument. But we believe right now the fee is favorable, it's the favorable option, and it would obviously become a very favorable option if the municipal authorities are successful in litigation with Westchester and the various other cases that are moving forward. But at least we're going to come out of the gate with something. To do the impervious coverage, to have something that's based on impervious coverage would require a significant investment of resources and monies to develop that information on a parcel by parcel basis. It is a very significant undertaking. We don't have it available to us right now. The county does not have it available. So we would have to build that, and that would be quite complex. Just some side issues that we thought about as we wrestled with this is whether or not the actual program itself, should it reside in the township or should it reside in municipal authority? Are there legal advantages, disadvantages associated with that? Part of the analytics behind how should this be run? Canvassing the various other townships, it seems like they're all over the map, but municipal authority seems to be the more predominant that we've seen. We've talked about the public communication, the advisory commission, critically important. The other thing we talked about is if you're going to go ahead and impose a fee, are we going to have an appeal? We're going to have a dispute resolution. We're going to have to be able to address situations. Are we going to have non-payment? Are we going to have enforcement of non-payment? So now it gets complex. Now we have to actually dig in on this. And if you're going to open the door, that's going to happen. And finally, key person. Someone is going to really have to drive this program and own it, or it'll falter. I don't think it can be done. A committee is needed in order to get the best of everyone's information, but I think a key person is going to have to drive. That's all I had. Anything else?
Hey, let me ask you a question. So, I know you said from canvassing around and looking at the other municipalities with regards to how they apply this, what, you said some of them are with the municipal authority and some are, I would guess, just
Within the government.
So what, how, like the one that I know that has always said to me is kind of like the put up on the pedestal is different, right? They spent, I think, like a full 2 years going through a full study. They did a GIS, they mapped it all out, resident by resident complaint. How do they administer this? You know?
We did not speak to different. We spoke to Radner, and they did it by a complete GIS investigation. And they developed a plan where for a residential property was based upon the size of the property. The commercial property, it was based upon the impervious coverage.
Okay. All right, and does Radner do it through their municipal authority? Do they have a municipal authority? Okay. What are the, what else around us? What else do they do? Or was it just Radner?
Yes, Radner, Westchester, media.
What is, I know what Westchester does. What does the media do?
I'm going to defer on that.
Yeah.
Because we got two different answers, so I'd rather let that be gathered.
Okay. And the total budget, excuse me, the total amount that Stan Tech identified 2 years ago was 8.1 million,
8.5.
8.5 million.
Yes.
I just would say that was on the first, I think, 4 or 5 projects. That was not the total amount of the 32 projects that were listed. We didn't get dollar amounts on all of them. but the first 5 or 6 projects were the
That's-
largest of those projects.
So out of the 32 projects that we have, the first 6 equal 8.5?
I believe that's correct. I'd have to look back exactly, but that 8.5 was not the total for all 36 projects. It was the total for the larger projects to get us started.
And we already allocated the stimulus money. What is that, 1.4?
It was
1.7.
1.4. I think we've spent about 300,000+ of it on the project over in Echo Valley.
Any other questions from the board? Any questions from the public? The podium.
Hi there, Cindy Mehallow, 87 Hunters Run, Vice Chair of the EAC, Penn State Master Watershed Steward. I know this is a very difficult issue. I appreciate all the effort the Finance Committee has put into this. I have a number of questions. I don't have a lot of answers, but just points to consider. You call it a tax versus a fee. And I know there's important differences there. But if it's a fee, then it's not a tax. And then why would 66 properties be tax exempt? It's not a tax. Why would not the $45 per quarter acre apply to every property? It's something to ask the lawyers who are present. I don't know if you can answer that here or.
Well, I was gonna say, I guess it's more of a question for Mr. Napholz and his committee, honestly, unless you want to provide an answer.
There was a court decision, I guess, earlier this year, that essentially said, I don't know what the current status of it is, but the court ruled that because the money was applied for the general benefit of the public, it's essentially a tax, even though you call it a fee. So, the borough of Westchester versus
Right, yeah.
Westchester University. So I don't know what the status of that is, but that was a significant finding.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the Westchester case. So there they had called it a fee.
That's the case that is currently I think it's appealed.
Yeah.
Wasn't that your question?
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it was. And you're right. I didn't realize they used the word fee.
Yeah.
And that wasn't enough to escape that. Then you made a reference to pervious versus impervious. That's the classical argument. I didn't know what you meant by that.
Oh, sorry, what I was getting at is, if you have a parcel that's an acre, and there's a residential home on one parcel, and next to it is a commercial property that's paved with a building, you can quickly envision there'll be a different outcome if there's a flood, if there's a significant rainstorm on the one property versus the other property, and especially for anyone who's downstream of that, as to which is the contributing party, which is the more flagrant contributing party. And so when you oppose a fee based on acreage, it doesn't necessarily solve that inequity. That's what I'm getting.
Thank you. Also, I was wondering, I know when you look at the maps for the pollution reduction plan, it very carefully delineates the parsed areas versus the other areas, and that the township isn't responsible for reducing the stormwater runoff from the parsed areas. So how does that differentiation enter into this? No, I was asking, if you look at the maps for the pollution reduction plan, and maybe Eric's familiar with this, there are parsed areas versus not parsed areas. And I know when the township went through the outfall mapping process, they calculated the stormwater that the township's responsible for mitigating. They did not include the parsed areas, right?
So that distinction in parsed is lands that either go directly to a storm sewer or flow directly to a stream. It's not necessarily a quantity of the amount of stormwater or it's just, does water go through a storm sewer system or not through a storm sewer system?
Okay, but, and I'm not the expert here, but it seemed to me that during the development of the MS4 and the PRP, that was a very important distinction, because I think that's one of the reasons the original PRP got sent back, is because that there were areas that were not indicated properly. You remember that, Steve? So I'm just wondering, and you know, I'm just putting it out there. I don't expect an answer tonight, but I'm just wondering, does that enter into it? If you're talking tax exempt, not tax exempt, commercial, residential, is that an important distinction? The other thing I'm wondering is that anytime you introduce a financial incentive penalty on people, there's an opportunity to incentivize people. And I know Eric can comment on this too, is that the most successful stormwater management is mitigation will not occur at the end of the, you know, where the water hits the stream, but it will be back up on the points of origination, which are the individual properties. And if you have a flat fee like this is a major change in the township. And I'm wondering, isn't this the opportunity to structure it in a way that it incentivizes homeowners and property owners to take action to change the land use patterns that exist that are contributing to this? Otherwise, it'll always all be on the township to pay for everything. But if somehow you can think of ways to incentivize people to use their property differently, to convert lawns to meadows, to add rain gardens, to add bioswales, to add all these different types of green infrastructure, I think that might be something valuable to include as you think about this whole system that you're thinking of imposing. The other thing is, I know that, you know, you said you've looked at
Cindy, just because, and I'm gonna let you continue.
just one last point.
Okay, all right, because we do have a
Yeah,
big
and-
budget presentation coming
Yeah.
up next, and, all right, good. And I just,
Yeah, no,
I didn't know if it was
the
gonna be more.
last thing is, in terms of resources, when you look at other townships that have done this, the EAC is a member of part of We Can Serve PA, which has a very robust library of resources, of model ordinances, sample ordinances. I don't know if you had looked at that or considered that, but it's a great resource. Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Nabholz? Sure, Mr. Skoukis.
I wasn't on the subcommittee, but I am on the finance committee. Just really quick.
Name and address for the record.
Alex Lucas, 33 Dunmeaning.
And just repeat what you just said as you're walking up to the podium so everybody can hear you. You're a member of the
I'm on
finance
the
committee.
finance
There you
committee,
go.
but not the subcommittee. So just to quickly address a couple points here, we weren't looking at how to incentivize people. That's sort of what the stormwater management rules are all about already. And if you imagine two parcels with nothing on them, okay, if somebody builds a house on it, there are rules that require them to manage the runoff. That's the stormwater stuff, but they only have to get back to the rate of the original runoff. Okay, so there's going to be runoff from both properties no matter what, and that's already happening. And we were told that this is an $8.5 million problem right now that needs to be solved right now. So I think that there's two different discussions to be had. One is to bolster the stormwater management rules and regulations, but the separate one, the one that we dealt with, was how do you finance and pay for right now flood problems that we're having in the township to the tune of big bucks. And that's what we came up with. Now we can, by doing this, what we put on that sheet, you can raise $1 million for the township each year by doing it that way. And then the township will have the discretion to either pay for projects out of that $1 million, or another option would be to fund a bond, to use it as debt service on a bond issue so that we could deal with all of the problems at once if the $1 million is insufficient. My concern on the committee was the $1 million isn't anywhere near what we need to raise to pay for problems that we have right now. So I mean, I think we want to encourage the board and everyone to do more on their land, but what we're on the finance committee, we're just looking at how do we pay for a problem that we need to deal with right now? And the best way is to just the same amount of rain falls, whether you have impervious or not impervious coverage on an acre. So that's the fairest way to do it is by quarter acre. And, you know, unfortunately for someone like me, my tax is going to go up by $1,000 under this proposal. My wife's not happy about it, but I think it's the fairest thing. And if you live in a condo, you own a condo, you're going to pay $45. If you live on a bigger piece of property, you can pay a lot more. And my property, unfortunately, a lot more rain falls on it when it rains. So under this system, I would pay more. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, now we'll move down to 8.2, 2024 budget, 2024 proposed budget.
Yeah, so just so we kind of set the expectation for tonight, for those that are here, I'm going to kind of go over a presentation now. You may want to make some adjustments to what I'm going to present to you before you move forward on an item later in the budget. And you can decide when you want to discuss that, whether you want to discuss it as we go or at the end. I'm going to present three different budgets in regards to three different sections of the budget, two of which I'm going to go over rather quickly. The other one I'm going to spend a little bit more time on. The first one that I'm going to go ahead and do, if we will drop down to the proposed other funds, so the first one, I'm not going to spend hardly any time on this. Nothing has changed. This was a presentation that I believe was done for you. If it wasn't at your last meeting, it was the meeting before. Does anyone feel like I need to go back through that one, or are you comfortable with what was presented last time, or do you have questions?
Nothing of substance has changed in that one?
Nothing of substance has changed, and so I'm kind of giving you an option. I will go through it and present it fully if you want me to, or I would let you just say, yes, you presented it fully last time and we're good with that.
What is the direction from the board? Supervisor Partridge? You're fine with it?
Fine.
Okay.
Supervisor Chandler, you're good? You good, guys?
Yep.
Perfect.
Okay, so you all know what that is. Those are the actual individual funds, and we would advertise the budget if you agree to advertise it with those that we presented at that time.
And that's posted online still.
And that is posted still online and is online tonight as part of our budget.
Thank you.
All right, if we can, I'd like to go to the capital, which we also presented to you before. There have been a couple changes in this, and I'm going to kind of talk through the changes. I'm not going to go through the entire presentation. You saw the basic presentation. I'm going to kind of talk through what the changes were and hopefully answer any of your questions. So I went back and took a thorough look at our capital. I want to remind you that in our capital fund, there are a few things that we've done. First of all, prior to 2022, actually, probably the second year I was here, we made a decision, the board made a decision to set aside some fund balance, and that was $1 million in the capital fund. Last year, you set aside some dollars that you committed, and that most of these are things you've been committing year over year. We talked about dam replacement. We talked about meadow preserve, doing that work. We've talked about the playground that we had at Greer Park that was taken out, of replacing that we committed dollars to the Public Works Vehicle Replacement Program. And then we also had some new dollars added last year and the year before. And then the ambulance trailer, if you recall, we had set aside $100,000 because we need to replace the ambulance trailer. And then we had road program last year, 400, of which we're going to spend the entire 400. And then the roof for the paper mill house, we had a donation of $40,000. And so that all was in a bucket, and that's roughly $4 million. Then last year, or this year, we had projects that we funded two different ways. One was we funded projects through the general fund, and there was roughly about $525,000 that we funded through the general fund. And those are things that you're well aware of. That's your fire department vehicle replacement, your road program of $400,000, your public works vehicle replacement of $75,000, and the playground of $25,000. Then in the budget, and what was a part of the budget presentation that we did, there were some expenses that we put in for 2022 or for 2023 that at this point I'm anticipating won't all be spent before we end the end of the year. We have not done the document management project, which was $41,000. The library patio refurbishment got put on hold until we wanted to address that when we did the roof, because we're going to have to tear up the patio to do the guttering out and get away from the building. So we were waiting on that. If you recall, we had the one-man leaf truck that we're still waiting on. We have monies from the grant for that, but there's about $55,000 that's ours. We talked about permanent speed tables. We talked about the Valley Ford Roads Bridge that we have to do. We're waiting on hopefully get a grant to cover half of that, but that's our portion is about $450,000. We talked about the St. Albans Circle project and the sidewalk project that we have going on right now on Ellis Avenue. And there's also some grant dollars to do another sidewalk project if we get that squared away pretty quickly. And then there were some other minor kind of expenses. One of the things that was major was $125 for Bartram Bridge. That project, I understand, is going to probably kick off probably in the next couple of weeks. But most of those expenses will be in 2023. You had asked that we put the baseball field on hold out here, the $480 or $98,000 for that. And then there was a couple other more minor type of things for 2020. What year we're in now, 2023, and that was $1.8 million. Then when we presented the budget earlier this year, I believe it was in September for the capital. I'm not going to go through all these. I'm just going to talk about the changes that have been made based on some numbers that we have gotten. Again, we had document management in there. We had the cameras and some things like that. The St. Albans Circle, we've spent more on engineering. And so that project's actually grown a little bit. So we think there's probably going to need to be another $50,000 or $60,000 needed for that. The road program, we would come out of the general fund. So that's still there. The roof on this building, we had originally gotten a quote that we thought was about $125,000. We asked our engineer to go look at that. That quote came back much significantly higher. Came back at about $818,000. And so that's now in that budget. And in addition to that, there was decking repair and guttering. And so that total was probably close to another about $175,000 in addition to that, because we're also addressing the roof on the maintenance building, and there's a lean-to that goes over the fuel tank and a variety of things that it protects, that it has to be determined needs to be torn down. And so that money is there's dollars in this budget that do that. And like I said, that's roughly just under $1 million. The paper mill house, you've already seen this. I think it was in this budget, but if it wasn't, we updated it. If we do the replacement of the roof plus fix the exterior repairs, that came in at just shy of $300,000. It was $299,000. $40,000 again was set aside for that. Obviously, that leaves a gap. If we did just the roof, I think the numbers came in closer to about 150, but to do the total repair, was the other. Then we had been looking for grant dollars, and we thought we would potentially get a grant to do the pavilion roof at Drexel Lodge, to replace the bridge, the walkway and the bridge that goes across, and also the gazebo. We have since found that our project does not qualify, so we will not be getting that grant. And so those dollars accordingly are $16,000 for the roof, $70,000 for the bridge, and $29,000 for the gazebo. Another project that's been on the agenda, on the budget, this number actually was in the budget. I think it was closer to about $40,000 originally. After our engineer did some more study on it, they came back and felt that it was going to be closer to 98,000, almost 99,000, to do the flashers on, not flashers, to do the speeds flashing on Gradyville Road by Langolin, where that blind spot is. We get a lot of complaints and concerns there. And then also on Goshen Road, there's a sharp curve that people, for some reason, decide to go off the road and take out the person's mailbox and the stone that's in their front yard. And so we think that the solution, working with PennDOT, would be to put these flashing speed signs in, and that's what that is. The other projects that were on there that I think are new, the only one that I think is new that wasn't on here before has to do with potentially, if we make a decision later tonight to maybe not continue doing some set aside for fire replacement vehicle, was putting the money aside. They're asking to be able to replace their truck now. That truck would be 1.2 million. And so we've set aside those monies if the board chooses to do that. In doing so, that would be about $12 million worth of projects, of which 2 million is coming from other sources or from our reserves that we had, and then 1 million is coming from the total between this year and next year would be 1 million coming from the general fund, what you budget every year to go over to capital. The monies that you agree that, you know, that's how we pay for the police vehicles. That's how we pay for those kind of things. We budget in the general fund and we move it over to capital. Make sense? Everybody with me? Okay. All right. So I just wanted to share that with you. That's capital. Any questions on the capital side? But basically it's pretty much the same as what we presented, except for what I talked about.
It's not even feasible in this world. It is a multi-level roof. We could do it in sections, and it is beyond comprehension. I've done 500,000 square foot warehouses for less than that. It is just beyond my comprehension. This building, I don't know how many square feet it is, but it's nowhere near $1 million for a roof on this building. And metal roofing lasts for 50 years. So if someone's telling us we need all new metal roofing, all new flat roofing, and whatever else roofing we possibly have on this building and some outbuilding, I don't believe it. We need to reevaluate, and we need to bid it out in sections, and maybe we only do a few sections that are the worst now and wait till the future, because it's just not, it's not realistic to ask residents in this town to pay $1 million for something that's not what the value is of this roof. It's just not the value. And I don't feel comfortable spending that kind of money. I mean, I mean, Mr. Johnson, you could say what you want to say. You're an engineer, a civil engineer. You're not an architect. You're not a roofing expert. I don't know if you have ones in your office. Maybe they should reevaluate what they come up with as a number, but that's not what these roofs go for. It's just not. And I don't know. So nowhere near is this even 15,000 square foot of roof. I don't even think it's that much.
So I do agree that it is a high price. I can just tell you that we currently are replacing, the prices of roofing is insane right now. We have Swarthmore Borough, they just started today on a roof. Those bids were between 1 million and 1.7 million dollars.
We don't have to accept any of them. We can rebid it a
Right.
million times.
Mm-hmm.
Take the same package and keep sending it out to new bidders. There's plenty of people when you go west of here that do roofing a lot more reasonable. Whoever's bidding around here at $1 million on a building like this, it's not feasible.
How
It's
big,
just not.
how big Swarthmore?
I was just checking that roof, what they're saying, this one is somewhere in the neighborhood of the roof we're putting on about 10,000 square feet. That roof was like 12,000 square feet.
So the two sections of roof that we're looking to replace, the police section was done when we did the upgrade in 2017, 18. That section was done at that time. The police roof, the section that goes out over where the Sally Port is and that whole section. No. That section of the roof would not be
Okay.
done. We're looking, there's a flat section that sits kind of right back over here that is having some issues. And there's a flat section there. I think the flat section came in at 60,000, if I recall. The major part of this was the roof that sits above the office space. We're not replacing the metal roof that comes down on that one section above the library. That's fine. But it's the section, it's the pitch section that goes across the center and that way, if
How
that
many
makes
square
sense.
feet are we talking?
I think
you
you
know?
said 10.
I was just roughly checking earlier today, it was about 10,000 square feet.
So you're
Everything.
telling me we got, okay, I just got a price today, just
Mhm.
today. Rip off 7,500 square feet of roofing and replace it with top of the line, 25-year, no dollar warranty for $75,000 or $82,000. So how are we here for 2,500 square feet more at 10 times the cost? It makes no sense. There's something wrong. And that's a removal and replacement, just like it is here.
Mhm.
And it's a variable height.
I
building.
think the one thing that I would make note of, and I don't know all that the engineer did and looked at. One of the issues that we have over that section of the building is all of the insulation is underneath the roofing. It is not inside the building. It is,
No, but you're.
I'm just saying,
understand materials are more. You rip everything off and you put down new insulation and new roofing.
Yeah.
That's,
so and so we're not looking at this today, anything that we went out on, like if, understand for purposes of budgeting, we put that aside so that we would know that we had the money.
I
We
understand
won't-
that, but we
we-
need to be
but-
prudent and we gotta think about it. And we gotta figure a new way to skin the cat here because, all right, granted, whatever they end up the budget vote is tonight, for whatever we're planning on spending. We can't go out and spend this kind of money on a project just because someone thinks it's worth that. And we bid these people that bid these phone numbers. They're called phone numbers when you get a number like that for a project like this. They're just phone numbers. They're numbers you throw away and you find somebody else. And if we don't, then we only do what we have
So
to do.
we would always, any project that meets the requirements, which I believe is right now about $22,000 or $23,000, would have to go out for a full formal bid. And we would do that. We would go out and get hopefully as many bidders as possible. Hopefully this number would come in significantly less. And if it doesn't, then the board could make the decision not to move forward. Today, this was the placeholder based on what we had asked the engineer to give us a number. It would be irresponsible of me not to put that number in your budget.
So I'm not like Mike, I don't have his background in development. However, so when you put together this estimate, I don't know, we're not replacing the whole roof. You said there's one section that's six years old. So you mentioned a flat roof, which is a different type of roof replacement, right? So that's got to be isolated. So the different pieces of the roof that are being replaced, I'm assuming, might require different materials, different labor rates, different cost. So when we do that estimate, is everything itemized? Is the flat roof material, labor breakdown. So you have that itemized estimate
Yes.
for the,
Yes.
for the different sections of the roof. So, Mike, would it
I
be,
just think when we bid this out, I know we're not bidding it out. Bid out in section. Always. 5 sections, 5 numbers, you get all 5 at the same time. Discount. Where it is, however you want to. It up, but we have to be realistic, and there's plenty of roofing consultants out there. Call a GAF or you call somebody that, you know, manufacturer, we'll send somebody out here, they'll recommend people that we can go to that are qualified or state certified, whatever you need to be on the bid list. You know, once they find out that, you know, real project, you'll get real numbers.
so maybe though, take the itemization that you did, your estimate, and share it with the board, because there's a couple members of the board who have experience in development, so they can look at them, and it's like Mike's saying, it doesn't look right, or maybe it's okay, but, you know, I would share that detailed estimate with the board.
This will go out to, this has to.
I understand it's gonna go
This
out.
hasn't really been on the budget that you're voting on, right?
No, no.
This is-
Well, it's a capital budget. We're gonna advertise, so.
Do you know what I mean? But
No, I understand it's not be dealt with
it's not your
tonight.
operational budget. This is just, so they're gonna do a bid package. It's gotta. get
No, I
reviewed.
got that.
Everybody can look at
I
it.
got that, but we're saying that the number of million, and then you hear numbers 85,000. Okay, you know, I'm not saying one is right and one's wrong, but take the itemized number, share it with the board. There's a few members of the board who can look at it. You know, and maybe from their experience, maybe have some input on it.
I'd like you to tell before we hop on with this, according to the bid package, what's the cost for the bid package?
From their firm before we put it out.
Yeah.
Before we spend $1 towards a bid package. Because bid package for a roof is very easy. You have a few details for the type of roof you have and you send it out. I'm not spending like we spent over around the corner at the old historical paper mill house.
Okay.
This bid package should be very simplistic and straightforward.
All right. So that's
I have
your,
one quick
oh
question
yeah, I'm
about
sorry.
Just a quick question about one of the slides that was up there. You
Okay.
had permanent speed tables.
Yes.
What was that for and what was the amount? didn't
I
see
think
the
it's
amount of that.
120,000 if I recall.
And what was that for?
That is, we had, when we were, so, for example, when, I think 2 years ago, we put speed tables out in like 3 places around town. One of those places was along Sawmill. One of those places was out here along, Ellis Avenue. I think we also put them out on roads. And one other place, and right now I'm drawing a blank where that other place was. And we at that time made a decision. I think the board said we don't want to keep speed tables on Sawmill, and so we took those out. And if you recall, I think the decision was to put stop signs in, and you put stop signs in at that location. We did say we were going to go ahead and put speed tables in at Ellis, and that's part of the project that we're doing right now with the sidewalks. There's speed tables that go in there. The question will be whether we go back. We're still having issues on roads. We're still having issues in a couple other places. As we test, we have those dollars set aside to go ahead and put in speed tables in those locations if you choose to take action. Because usually what happens is we test and then we're budgeting the year behind to get the money for those. But we didn't do any tests this year. But roads was one of the places that we had talked about potentially putting speed tables.
And then the Ellis ones are covered. We don't pay for those.
We're making those part of the grant because we're treating that all as traffic calming and walking. We had originally thought we were going to have to pay for those, but we're not going to have to pay for them because we got the grant.
So, and how much, like, if we went forward with roads, how much are those? How much is it for one?
I think we've said that they would be somewhere between $15,000 and $20,000 per table. And I think on roads, we said potentially 3. I think there was enough in there for you to do like 2 different locations in the township if you chose to. Any?
Yes, yes, sorry.
Okay, so I'm going to switch over to the general fund. I'm going to talk a couple different things there. So first of all, this is first time that I'm presenting this publicly. I have talked to a couple of you individually trying to just understand because when I present these initial numbers, they're going to be kind of shocking. And so I just want you to kind of know where we were, what we started with. On the first slide, if you'll go down one slide, please. When we first started looking at this, we projected that the revenues that were projected were about 10.8 million, and then expenses were 12 million with $1.1 million, almost $1.2 million gap. It was clear to me that that's not something that was manageable for the township at this time. So we started looking and we started trying to figure out what were some things that we could adjust, make correction or make adjustments to, so that we could get that number down to a number that would be a discussion point for you here tonight. And so I'm going to tell you what we did to get you to your to get to where I'm going to talk about where we are tonight. So the first thing was that we reevaluated revenue. And those of you who know me, I'm not a big fund balance spender just to spend fund balance to balance the budget. However, there were two areas of the budget that were very clearly big hitters. And one of them I've talked about multiple times with you, and that was related to the pension. Both of our pension plans were reevaluated this year. They get evaluated every other year. And our required contribution went up from about 400,000 to about 825,000. So it was about $425,000 increase. So the recommendation was that for this year, that we would cover 325,000 of that out of fund balance, with the idea that we would maybe next year add another 100,000 into the budget. Probably have 225 that we would still cover out of fund balance. And then hopefully on year 2025, they would do a new evaluation and we would be kind of in line or at least closer, and we wouldn't need to be coming up with a full 400,000. The other thing was the $50,000 to remove ash trees. We've been kind of nickel and diming that over the last couple of years. We've spent about 25,000 this year removing ash trees. We know of another 50 that needs to be spent at this point. That's not something that's going to keep reoccurring in your budget once we get those ash trees down that are the safety ones. So we need to do that. And so because they're both kind of one-time cost, or at least the pension's not necessarily one time, but we see a pattern where we might be able to take advantage of what will happen in 2025. We said, let's use fund balance to kind of get us through this time. The other thing that I did is I went back and I looked at revenues. We had been collecting interest, and so we do a combined account and monies have to be allocated out. We finally got all the allocations done. And when we got all the allocations done, I think there's about $33,000 more in revenue in interest based on some investments that you all had approved. And we're probably going to recommend doing a little bit more investments with the interest rates being where they are, maybe purchase a couple more CDs. By driving that up, we think we can pick up about $33,000. The other LST tax, when I looked at what we received in as of the end of September, when I first presented, or when I first talked about LST tax and thought of what the numbers were, September had not come in. It has now. And so when I looked at that, I think that there's probably about $30,000 that we can pick up there. And then there was a few minor other adjustments that we made that it totaled 1,700. So we increased revenues 439,000. But remember, doing that, we were using about 375 of fund balance. I didn't just come up with more revenue in those areas. So that gave us a new total revenue of 11,300 or 11,300,000. And then if we can, let's go down to the next slides. We'll talk about what we did in the expense area. The first thing I did in the expense area was I looked at, we have a custodial position that we've been trying to fill. Our public works team has been taking care of the building inside. We can probably get away with another year without doing that. If we take the custodial position out, the wages and the benefits, it was 94,000. So we took that out. The library had asked for a new position because it was a new position, and we removed that 53,000 for that. Not saying it's not important. We do think it's important. It's just with where we were, I didn't know how we would move forward on that. There was money in the budget for the planning consultant. We probably are going to need 80 to 120 long-term for that. But 40,000 was in the budget this year and 40,000 in the budget next year. My suggestion is that we go ahead and designate the 40,000 from this year, set it aside, and we would use it next year. We could take that 40,000 out, and hopefully in 2025, we would be in a different position and we could look at that a little differently. So that's what that 40,000 is. We looked at what the increases were to savings for future purchases. And again, I'm not saying these aren't important. I think they're very important. But when we're looking at a gap of what we were looking at as $1 million, I was trying to bring that down. And so we took out 25 for public works vehicle replacement, 25 for fire, 25 for the playground, and 12 for the road program. In addition to those, I looked at our third-party inspection fees, and that's on the next slide. I looked at the third-party inspection fees and talked with Andy. We felt that knowing that permits are going to be going down because of pretty much all the build out that's happened over at Ellis is pretty much done. Residentially, we don't think we're going to have the number of houses built in next year that we have right now. And our third party does all the inspections on the residential. And so we think that that number could be dropped an additional 10,000. And so we put that in. There was money put in for a possible officer replacement costs. It cost us about $6,000 once we pick an officer. Once we go through the process, by the time we do all the medical checks and getting the uniforms and all of the background checks and everything, it costs about $6,000. We had an officer that told us that he was going to retire, and then he's told us, well, maybe he won't. Well, if he maybe won't, we were not going to put it in the budget. And if we need to, we'll have the conversation about how we'll pay for it at that time. There was $6,000 on community events. It still leaves $9,000 in for community events. We did not spend the $9,000 this year. To have another $6,000 sitting there for next year, I think we're covered for what we're doing right now, and it keeps it the same. The Newtown and Bloom asked for $5,600 for Public Works to take over watering the hanging baskets. Again, not that we don't think the watering the baskets are important, but two things. One, we didn't think the $5,600 would cover the cost of the additional Public Works folks and the time, and having it in the budget at that location just wasn't benefiting us, so we took that out. They also asked to send 2 volunteers to the American in Bloom annual conference, and because that was new and not something they had done this year, we took that out. I also removed $5,400 from about 5 other accounts. Most of them were smaller amounts, but I removed those. And they were mostly things that I felt like would not impact the current level of service we were providing. So we reduced expenses $284,000 to $11,769,000. That, if you go down to the next slide, that leaves you a balance of $468,000. I can go through the rest of this slide presentation pretty quickly. I am not going to cover everything in it. I'm going to actually talk through the different areas, and I'll just let you guys just kind of go through the slides as I talk. I'm going to try to cover pretty quickly everything, but if you will, I'm going to change do a different presentation for myself. So basically, a couple quick things on the note for operations. We have no new positions in personnel. We took all that out. Instead of paying, the only two changes that we really make, one is instead of paying current staff overtime to come and operate the cameras, we've brought on 3 students to come in and operate the cameras. So we're still, I think, paying a fair wage for those to do that, but we're not paying overtime rates for our employees to do that. We did eliminate the custodian position that I mentioned. Police under contract have a 3.25% increase. Based on cost of living, we did a 3% increase for non-uniform. Under the operation area, under legislation, the big change there was we had an increase under communications of $12,000 to improve our communications. And we did have some savings of about $4,500 on postage. The change there that's really important to understand, I know some people probably might not like this, other people will. The newsletter would go from being a printed newsletter and would go to being a digital newsletter. And so we will do a couple mailings between now and the end of the year, encouraging people to sign up. We'll probably do it with a QR code, let people just go in and sign up, fill out the form, and get them to get their electronic newsletter so everybody can get it. Under operation, and we will print out hard copies, have available if anybody wants one. Under administration, we had some changes under benefits. There was a family change that was $3,600. Under finance, there was actually a decrease in benefits because we had budgeted, assuming that the person that we would hire as the finance director might be a family. They were parent-child, but they weren't a family. Or she is a family, but you know what I mean. It wasn't family covered. That sounded terrible. And then there was also an increase of $6,500 for our audit expense for 2024 or 2023's audit based on the auditors that we have now. That's what they told us. In the tax collectors area, the next, you can keep going through to the screens that each one of these, that they can see what I'm kind of talking about. There was an $1,800 increase. You can go, yeah, if you'll go down, we can skip over all the revenues real quick. We've talked about revenues already. Go on down, I'm sorry. Keep going. All right, so I've talked about legislative, we can go down, talked about administrative, talked about finance, and talked about tax collecting, and now I'm down to legal services. Under legal services, the only changes that we had, we did add a few dollars because of current years where we are, what we've billed out. We have a lot of different things that are going on that are requiring our legal counsel. And then we did add in $1,600 to continue moving forward with our codification costs as we continue to do zoning amendments and land development amendments. Under IT, we have a couple things that have increased cost. One of those is the web provider has increased their rate. There was also the chat bot that we had put in, that full price kicked in this year. And under electronic mail, we've added some additional mailboxes, and we're also testing some web-based software for our users because our software is now going out of date. We're going to test some web-based software for a couple different areas to see if it makes sense and how that would look going forward versus replacing all of the software. Replacing all the software would be $60,000 on all the different computers, and that seemed really expensive. So I just want to test it before we do it. Under facilities, we have overall decrease actually of about 5,000. Supplies were up, electricity was up. Actually, maintenance went down. We've talked about this a little bit. We had brought in CM3 to do a special project. And so we increased our budget in 2023, but we're actually going to drop it back down about 12,000, but it's still increased over what our budget was in 2022. Police budget, last year we had actually gone out and we had made the decision to bring on 2 officers early in the year to replace 2 officers that were retiring. So this year we're not recommending that. We're not doing that. But when you take their increase plus remove those 2 officers, the cost for the personnel part dropped 76,000, but the benefits side actually went up 35,000. And the reason for that is you have your new officers that replace the officers that went out, plus you now have new retired officers, and we cover health insurance for the first until they reach 65. So for a couple of these officers, it will actually be for about 10 years that we'll be covering health insurance. And so, but the increased cost this year was 35,000. Decreased cost for new hires overall was 30,000, and that had to do with the fact that we hired 6 last year. We took out the 6 that I talked about earlier, and so that was 30,000. There was an increase. There is an increased projection cost of tuition expenses of about 10,000, vehicle insurance of about 9,000. Under the fire department, the firemen's relief monies came in higher, so that's the reason why the fire department went up what it went up. The ambulance, there was $1,000 in fuel that went in. The next slide, please. There was $1,000 related to fuel costs. Under the codes department, benefits went up 7,000 for a change in family status. We decreased the third-party inspections, not only the 10 that I talked about, but another 77,000 before even the 10 that I talked about. Under planning and zoning, next slide, we talked about the 40,000 already. And under the recycling, the next one down, small change under emergency management, $1,000 went up there. We were looking at a cart to help for having portability of what they're doing. Go ahead on down. No change really there under crossing guards other than cost of living change. Under recycling, this was the contract amount that went up. Actually, the contract went up 9,200. There was some savings in a couple other line items. Public Works, I talked about the custodial position not being filled. There was an increase due to change to family status of about $8,000 for benefits. And when George looked at what it was going to take to do uniforms or protective clothing, he said there was an increase of about $3,100 there for next year. Under traffic controls and signals, there's actually a decrease of 37,000. I think that's one back. Oh, those 2 are zeros at this time. There's a decrease there, about 27,000. I think it says 23 on the screen because there's a couple small increases. So that number was mostly related to insurances that we had where people hit traffic poles. For some reason, this year was a banner year. I think we had 3 different poles hit this year under traffic control devices. And so hopefully we don't have any next year and we won't need to change the budget. The next area is the tree. We talked about that. There was an adjustment. Oh, street lights, there was no change. I'm sorry. Maintenance and repair to bridges, no change. Under the street program, there's no change. Under the tree area, there was 41,000. Most of that was related to the ash tree removal that I talked about earlier. Go ahead down. Stormwater, no change. Participation in recreation, no change. That's been the same for quite a few years. There is an increase under Historic Commission and Historic Society. Most of this increase has nothing to do with what is happening at the Paper Mill House and has to do with the Historic Commission. They are looking at adding new properties to the register, being a little bit more out with their pieces. getting out and making more people aware of what they do. So they want to put a brochure together and a couple of other things. So there's a increased cost of about 12,000, almost 13,000 there. A lot of that cost has to do with what it will take. They plan on presenting 18 properties to you next year. And so there'll be cost, legal cost to go through the zoning amendment, zoning map amendment that needs to be done. Parks, there's an increase in the mowing contract of about 2,500, a decrease an increase in the third-party maintenance area of about 9,600, but that 6,000 that I told you about that we were taking out of community events brings that down. There's also $1,200 in for rain garden management for our 2 rain gardens here and up at the Little League. Then under environmental, or the library, because we took out the other was 0. Under environmental, we had a reduction of about 2,000 in the area of the EAC, and then $1,000 in the Newtown and Bloom. Basically, we're covering the cost of continuing on with American and Bloom. I think it's like $300, which we paid this year. Debt service goes down 3,000. Pension goes up, as I mentioned, about 425, and insurances, we're projecting about a $9,400 increase. Interfund transfers should be the same. And so total expenses, as I've already talked about. If you go down to the last screen, please, we're back to the 468,000. So that's your budget for 2024. And I realize that we probably need to discuss what direction we want to go, but that's where we had gotten you before this meeting.
All right, thank you, Mr. Neese. Questions from the board? Or direction from the board? Well, I'll ask one question real quick.
Yep.
What was the, because Supervisor Chandler just asked me this and I don't know it off the top of my head, so I figured I'd ask you, what was the amount of fund balance we used last year?
I think it ended up being a total of 526,000. What I will say is we probably are not going to use that because our revenues this year are such that we probably are not going to need to use it.
That's why I was asking.
Yeah.
Steve, what was the budget expenses for this year? And what's the projected actual on the expense side? Just the expense side.
So on the expense side is projected as the budgeted was 11.3, almost 11.4, and expenses right now projected is 11.2.
All right, so my understanding is projection is an overage in the current budget of
No,
1.1?
No.
Overall.
Maybe I need to say that again. The budget that we set for 2023 was 11,385,000.
Right.
Currently, our projected is 11,179,000.
Still same thing, 200,000.
It's 200,000, but I think I thought you were saying that it was 200,000 over.
No,
And I'm saying it's actually 200,000.
200,000 under, and
Yeah.
then, so on the revenue side, we're somewhere around 900,000 over, so somewhere in the excess of 1.1 would be the budget excess
For this year. Is that what you're asking me?
Yes.
I'm going to just check this real quick. Hold on a second. Yes.
Okay. So I guess maybe take a couple minutes, if you don't mind. Yeah, so This is
Remind,
my,
just real quick.
Yeah.
So we finished the presentation part. We have you have two options. You can go ahead and discuss now and try to get to where you want to be and get down to that, or we can discuss it when we get down to new business. If you want time to think and kind of digest everything I said.
What's the board want to do? I'm fine either way.
I'm fine either way too.
You want to get through, we'll get through everything.
Let's just get through.
Let's just get through everything and then we'll be able to burn through this. And then we can focus on the budget. All right. Thank you, Mr. Neese. We'll now move down to 9.1 report from the Township Engineer, Mr. Johnson.
Yes, just two quick updates. First, for the roads program, last time we talked, they were just had started the paving. All the roads have been paved, and the contract all went relatively smoothly. We're currently working through final quantities and any punch list items, which we're not really expecting much. So it went well. Successful project wrapping up. And then as far as Ellis Avenue sidewalk project is continuing, the contractor is currently installing sidewalk and aprons and working with the various residents as we get to each aprons. As of today, they're out there installing the ramps, ADA ramps in the vicinity of Gallagher's Way, and they're going to be heading back up, and they also will be pouring that additional section of side curb up at 501 Ellis this week that you had approved at the last meeting. And then there will be continuing the rest of the concrete work and restoration of the front yards. And then they have just procured all of the stormwater equipment, and we're hoping that they're going to start installing that at the end of this week into next week.
Let me ask you a question. You're doing the curb for 501 this week, or they're doing the curb for 501 this week. When is that sidewalk going to be not completely finished, but when's the concrete going to be finished so that people can start walking on it?
They
That full
are
segment.
installing a good section of it this week. I would hope that we have a continual sidewalk next week. And then we're having the sections they've already poured, we're working with them to get that area restored and start making all the front yards, return to a stable condition. So hopefully by next week, we'll actually have the sidewalk.
All right, and then when are they installing the speed tables, the permanent speed tables? When's that begin?
That is trying to figure that out. I would like to, that's probably going to be the last phase of the project.
Yeah.
When we end up, and I say that because I don't want them to get disrupted
Yeah.
or damaged when they do stormwater work along the edge of the road. Unfortunately, we've one of the joys of low bid contracting. Sometimes the contractors take much longer than you would like to see happen. We're contemplating if the winter turns out to be warmer, then we would install the speed cushions also, but there is the opportunity or the possibility may delay them to have a better end product.
But you're not expecting that the sidewalk's going to be impacted
No, the
and
sidewalk is
restoration.
going to be installed, yes.
and restoration before the seriousness of winter starts setting in?
It will be restored to before
Okay.
a serious winter, we're gonna have a stable condition, yes.
All I had. Thanks, Eric. And I will just note that I know that a lot of residents have been reaching out to you and Stephen directly. And so I appreciate you guys getting back to them as quickly as you have been. It's a good project, but it's a tough project. Any other questions for Mr. Johnson? Mr. Neese?
Yes, I just have a couple things, and I want to be clear on the first one. The deer call that's at Ridley State Park has nothing to do with the one we're going to talk about later on the agenda. But this is a deer call at Ridley Creek State Park, November 30th and December 7th, mostly just so when people start hearing all the gunshots, they'll know what that potentially is. So just wanted everybody to be aware. The second thing is the township's ordinance that we have says that anybody who goes in and does any work in the roadway will repave that area half width. And so Aqua has done a fair amount of work over in the Heights. They offered us some dollars. The dollars were actually pretty good, but we didn't know when we would get in there to pave. And we think it's going to be a couple years for sure. And Aqua's going to be doing work for the next couple of years. So we thought it was best that they go ahead and do half width restoration. So they are moving forward with that.
And when are they going to start that?
They may have actually started it today. I saw the equipment out there, so my guess is they'll probably be starting it very quickly here.
'Cause I know that a lot of people saw that mill truck out there, but it looks like they just milled over the patch they did. The entire trench all the way down.
Well, that's probably true because they have to do trench restoration first before
Okay.
they do their whole pack.
So that'll be done before the winter time?
That's according to George's conversation with them. He was expecting to do, to be working on the paving this week. And what you saw would be trench restoration, and then
Okay.
they have to pave half width the road.
Perfect. As long as it's done by winter, that's all I wanted to know. Any questions for the township manager?
That's the goal, that's for sure.
Perfect. Any questions for the township manager? Move down to section 10.1. I have reviewed the bills and I'll make a motion to approve the bills on check register A dated November 13th, 2023, totaling $268,984.95.
Second.
Motion was made by the chair, seconded by Supervisor Roberts Lycap. All those, is there any board discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion carries unanimously. I've reviewed the bills and I'll make a motion to approve the bills on EFT Register A dated November 13th, 2023, totaling $979.42. Motion is made by the chair, seconded by Supervisor Partridge. Is there any board discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion carries unanimously. 11, Section 11, escrow developer release, 11.1. Can I get a motion approving the final escrow release for Muirwood Hills totaling $25,225.05 as approved by Pennoni Engineering?
So moved.
Second.
Motion was made by Supervisor Russo, seconded by Supervisor Roberts Lycap. Is there any board discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion carries unanimously. 12.1, can I get a motion approving escrow reduction number 5, the final release for the Ellis Preserve Townhome Enclave totaling $164,392.37 as approved by Stantec Engineering?
If
Motion is made by,
I'm sorry, go. If
motion was
before
made
you-
by super, let me get to this.
I just want to say something before you vote.
Yeah. Motion was made by Supervisor Russo, seconded by Supervisor Chanlis. Is there any board discussion? Before we do that, we'll turn it over.
Yeah, I just
Township
wanted to
Engineer.
make sure that we are doing a full release on the bond. There are a couple light standards, as I understand, that need to be put in that they couldn't get the brackets for. They have, I think the whole value of that is somewhere around about $1,500 to $2,500. They've given us a $10,000 escrow to hold on their behalf. So you're going to have another vote at one point to do a release of that $10,000. So I just wanted you to be aware when you see this, you are doing final release on the bond, but they've given us $10,000.
And the issue
And
with,
it's been reviewed by the solicitor.
and the issue with that stormwater retention basin, has that been resolved? I know that there were some residents who had questions or concerns about that,
It has been built to what was designed.
and it's working, Eric. There's no issues with that.
That would, I believe that's actually Giovanna, but
Do you
that's.
know of
that's-
any issues with that?
As far as I was told, it was designed, it was working as it was designed and it was okay.
Any other board questions? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion carries unanimously. Section 12, we're going to skip 12.1. We're going to go down to 12.2. Consider approving a deer coal in the township. Mr. Neese.
Actually.
That's right. You're right. Sorry. So,
Actually,
hold on.
on this one, I don't know what you're gonna move.
so that's why I just said, so hold on. The Supervisor Partridge was correct. So, can I get a motion? Supervisor Partridge made a motion. Is there a second for it?
Second.
Okay. Seconded by Supervisor Roberts Lycap. Now we'll move into board discussion. So,
Well, and the reason I was saying is I think that I think you were shared an email that had two options. One option was to kind of do was to do a call that involved mostly local hunters. And you can do that. The second option was to bring USDA in, and USDA would do a number of calls depending on how large of a project that you wanted to do. And so if USDA comes in and does it, the bottom line, if I recall right, is about $30,000. It could go up to as much as 200. I think it's 6 nights for the 30,000, if I remember, and it's 30 for the 200. So there's basically two options, and then within the second option, there's multiple options for you to get to, and that's the reason why I wanted to make sure what you knew, what you were making a motion.
You don't have, funds set aside, I come from somewhere.
It would, right,
Set aside.
yeah.
So they, talking about, a little bit, I guess, to me, the only difference. Safety issues, so, the local hunters versus the USDA, I mean, I guess my thought is it would be maybe a little safer to go with the USDA, which is gonna cost some money. But, I believe that we've had local hunts before,
And we had, I think we had, Rich did some review of the code. And I sent out some information. I don't have it right in front of me, but there is a certain amount of feet from any residence or where people are that people have to be in order to do the hunt and those kind of things. And if we do it, we would have to work and make sure that all of those things were met.
what historically, when I believe we've done one, but can you comment on that and when?
I'm not aware of the township doing one. State law provides that hunters are allowed to hunt deer as long as it's within deer season. Can't stop it, it's state law, and it's, I think it's 150, you have to have permission of the property owner.
Okay,
Gotta be 150 feet from resident for bow hunting, and I think 450 feet for rifle hunting, and there's other requirements and licenses and stuff.
so the hunts that I'm probably thinking of are just happened during deer season.
I suspect that there's just
Yeah.
people hunting on private property on properties that were
Right.
big enough to allow that
For
to
like
occur
a week
safely.
or whatever, yeah.
So, but I'm not aware, and I'm not saying there wasn't. I'm just not aware of a
Yeah, I
township program. doing it.
my memory's good. But, so with the second
I'm
option,
certain before Listener was developed, that huge expanse was used for hunting. I'm
Yeah.
sure of that.
I heard about that.
I know.
Yeah. Yes.
So, with the second option, you're saying it's 30,000 per session per day or whatever?
I think my understanding was it was 30,000. Maybe I'm saying this wrong. I know Suzanne talked to him, but my understanding was 30,000, and that was for 6 nights.
Yes.
And that would, yeah. Okay.
So, yes, I mean, like, when you're making any kind of investment, you want to know what you're spending for.
Yeah.
What does what's the situation now and what does 30,000 get us?
Yeah, so here, I guess here's what I would like here's what I was really hoping you would give me direction and give staff direction on tonight. One, do you really want to do a call? And if the answer is yes, then is your preference option 1, where we involve local folks, or option 2, where we do the USDA? If you pick option 2, I would say all you're doing tonight then is giving me direction to go back and start negotiating with USDA and find out what the exact prices are. I would have to bring that back to you, and you would have to have a formal vote at that point.
I also
Okay,
want
so-
to add too, just since we're talking about the option 2 for the USDA, because I don't want residents to think, or the board to think, we're gonna have people out there firing shotguns off, at night. So while it will be a firearm, it is government sharpshooters that come in with silencers. So it's gonna be silencers at
Yeah.
night when they come in and do that.
And option 1 would be.
I think it's
Okay.
both. I think
Yeah.
it's both.
So my,
One's both.
so my, what I would do is amend my motion to say that my motion is for the township manager to look into option 2 and provide the board with more detail as to the cost versus the benefits. So that would be my motion, and I'll amend to put that on the table.
Yeah, I kind of butchered the whole thing, so I think you're really just making it. I think I butchered it pretty bad. So everybody heard Supervisor Partridge's motion. Is there a second?
I'll second my second, or I'll
Alright.
second the amendment to my second for his first.
All right. Suzanne got that for the minutes, right, Suzanne? So I know what to do. Yeah. All those in favor?
I had a question.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, sure, guys.
I just had a question, because I know we haven't really talked about this much, but my initial thought was that the township wasn't necessarily in favor of doing a deer call, or maybe I don't want to misrepresent that, but I mean, are you recommending one of these two options as administration?
I think that the staff has said that if we were going to recommend one, I think we would recommend option two. If regarding option one, we felt like we did not want to be the ones responsible for setting up I'm going to say it's non-controlled. It is controlled, but we didn't feel like we wanted to be in control of something that wasn't on township property and be responsible for hunters being out and potentially doing something that we could potentially have some kind of responsibility for because we set up the call. That was our concern. I think if we use the USDA, you've got a whole different level of responsibility there. You've got the federal government basically coming in and doing that.
Basically, you don't want a bunch of people with guns out on the street.
Or bows and arrows or whatever.
Yeah.
That was our concern. That was the concern that Chris and George and I talked about from a standpoint of it's one thing if you're controlling it on your property. Like if we had said we're only going to do it on the nature preserve, I think in order to do this, you need to be on multiple properties across the township at the same time to achieve what you really want to achieve. Because once you start, you're smart, they move. And so you want to be in multiple locations. And I think that's what the USDA would do.
I mean, do you think, like, from a township perspective, like, if the option was not doing one at all?
Yeah.
Or the USDA, I mean, is your recommendation that we need to have the USDA come in versus leaving it to the private property owners?
I think that if the township feels like there's a problem that we need to address, and we have some residents who are complaining about the number of deer, they're definitely increasing in the community. I don't know what November 17 and December, whatever dates they were, or November 30 and December 7th are going to do. Like, will that do enough in Ridley Creek State Park to help the township? I kind of doubt it because I think it's far enough away that it won't. But it might help because it might move deer back over that direction. It might clean out enough that, I don't know how far, I don't study deer, okay? And so, like, I don't know what their movement patterns are. I can tell you the ones that hang out at the back of my house, I see almost every day, and they like to bed down.
Them, right?
Huh?
You name them?
Well, I could. And I can tell you last year, the first year we moved in, it was 3. I'm now up to about 7. And so it's not getting better. And it just keeps growing and growing. And those are just the ones that are in my backyard. And if you know where I live, I don't have a big backyard. So that's kind of where we are. So I think that from a standpoint, I don't think the township wants to take on the responsibility of controlling the hunt. We were very clear about that. And that's what was originally presented to us. I think staff would say if USDA came in and did something, we were more open to that because we felt like it was controlled and we weren't taking responsibility. They were taking the responsibility. But I do think it's a decision. We didn't want to make a decision on whether you should do a call or not. We felt like that's a board decision as a policy. Do you want to be involved in that? Because that's kind of a sticky thing. Some people get upset when, you're doing that. And so are you willing to take that on? I may not really have answered your question, but that's
You did. I'm not sure it was a fair question either,
but that's where that's kind of my understanding where staff is. And I'm speaking for several staff members. They may have actually a little difference of opinion, but that's what my understanding was where we were.
Suzanne, did you also say that all the meat they collect will go to a food shelter? Food bank? Got it. Not that impacts it much, but just so everybody knows, it's not like it's being wasted. All right, so we have, the motion's been made and seconded. Is there any other board discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. 12.3, can I get a motion to consider waiving the application fee and security deposit for the tree lighting special event permit? A total of $275. The township will also be providing police and public works support as needed.
So move for approval.
Motion was made by Supervisor Partridge, seconded by Supervisor Russo. Is there any board discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion carries unanimously. 12.4, can I get a motion approving the advertisement to sell the following 4 decommissioned township vehicles: 2006 Ford Explorer, 2010 Ford Explorer, 2011 Ford Crown Victoria, 2017 Ford Interceptor.
So moved.
Second.
Motion was made by Supervisor Roberts Lycap, seconded by Supervisor Chandler. Is there any board discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion carries unanimously. Section 13, old business, none. Section 14, resolutions of legislation in action. 14.1, can I get a motion approving resolution 2023-36, authorization of Newtown Township in the PSAT's Unemployment Compensation Group Trust?
Second.
Motion was made by Supervisor Russo, seconded by Supervisor Roberts Lycap. Our solicitor indicated that that resolution does not need to be read since it was discussed in a prior meeting. So we'll forego the reading of that. Any board discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion carries unanimously. Now we'll move it back up to 12.1, which is to consider approving the advertisement for the proposed 2024 budget. Before we get to that motion, I think there's a lot more discussion that needs to occur. So Supervisor Partridge, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I just want to. This is my last budget discussion from this side of the table. So after 12 years on the township board, which will be completed in what, 6 weeks, I think. And then 8 years.
Nobody's counting, right?
Yeah, 8 years on the Marple School Board before that. So it's 20 years of budgets from this side of the table. So, so Larry, make a seat available to me for next year. I'll be sitting next to you for this discussion. So anyway, and just a little bit of history. So just indulge me here. So 12 years ago, when I started on the board, when I was elected, we had a situation. We had a lot of situations in the township. From the financial perspective, we really didn't know how much money we had in the budget, in the fund balance, in the reserve. And actually, Larry, you came in and helped go through that because the previous administration had, to be quite honest, didn't have a clue. And I believe we had somewhere maybe around $200,000 in the fund balance. If I recollect that might be close. Maybe it was less than that. But it wasn't much. So over the last years, and again, I'm not saying this for myself, it's really the efforts of a lot of people, and a big credit to Steve, who took over as township manager. What year, Steve?
December of
Sorry,
2014.
14?
December of 2014.
2014, yeah. So, so 9 years ago. And since Steve's been in the position, we've really accomplished a lot. We have good management, we have good morale within the township. We have proper staffing. We didn't have proper staffing before that. We didn't have proper staffing with the Public Works Department, with the police department. Vehicles, all the vehicles back then were old. We kept them a long time and patched them together. We didn't buy too many new vehicles. As far as planning, there really wasn't, to be honest, there wasn't much planning. And when Steve started, and the boards, this board and the board before that, and over the last dozen years, the boards along with Steve changed all that. And we had the advantage of a lot of development going on within the townships. So we had additional tax revenues, and we got a lot of money out of the permit fees. And over the last, dozen years, we spent a lot of money too. We spent money that needed to be spent. Spent a lot of money on the roads. I don't know how many miles we paved, since he's been here. Significant. There was patching done before, but now we not only have paved a lot of roads, but we have a plan to continue that into the future. When it comes to our equipment and vehicles, we have money going into the budget, into the operating budget, to save for capital expenses, to buy police vehicles, to buy public works vehicles, to buy fire vehicles. So again, good, prudent planning going into the budget. And today, instead of 200,000 or whatever it was, and might have been significantly less than that. I don't remember what the number that we had in the fund balance, but today we have somewhere between $7.5 and $8 million in the fund balance. And we also have a fund balance policy that says that we need to keep in the fund balance. The fund balance is the savings account. That's what we draw on to pay the bills. That we need to keep a minimum of 3 months of fund balance in there. And, with a budget somewhere close to 12 million, 11, 12 million a year, that's about $1 million a month. So 3 million would be what our policy requires. And we have maybe closer to 8 million in that account. Township's in good financial position. In addition to that, we have the capital reserve fund. So that's another savings specifically for capital projects with about 9 million. I don't remember what we had in capital 12 years ago, if we had anything, maybe zero. Yeah. So we have almost 8 million in the fund balance and 9 million in the capital reserve. So again, credit Steve's leadership in the administration and Steve's staff and this board and the prior boards for turning around the situation and the community and people like Larry who came in and helped straighten it out in the beginning. So we're in a good position. So we have to make a decision tonight on this budget, what we're going to advertise. Over the, I believe this year, as Steve mentioned, the 2023 budget, we're going to have a surplus of at least $1.1 million, and that's included, I believe, in the 8 million that I mentioned. And with what was presented with Steve's proposal, we were sitting at a deficit still of $469,000. So the way to balance that is a combination of two things. Using part of that 1.1 million surplus that we had this year, or raising taxes, or a combination. And just from my 20 years experience, I would say probably maybe a combination of the two, with a small tax increase and the rest taken from fund balance. That's just my personal thoughts, not necessarily the other 4 board members. And the equation would be, for every percentage of tax increase, we close the gap by $65,000. So for instance, with a 3% tax increase, you would take 200,000 from additional tax revenue and another 270,000 from that 1.1 million surplus that we had this year. So we're in a very good financial situation now, and compared to what we were a dozen years ago, it's light years ahead, and good planning for the future, because like I said, there were savings in the budget as an expense for the future budget for things like vehicles. We're putting it away into a savings account. So it's not even using that 8 million Steve also has line items in there for vehicles and for the road program. So, again, it's a compared to the past, it's a rosy situation, and I believe it's a rosy future. I mean, you know, it's been fueled by a lot of development, but it's also been fueled by good fiscal management. And, you know, I'm optimistic that when I'm sitting in the chair next to Larry, you know, it's still gonna look rosy, right? So anyway, yeah, the board has a decision to make, and it just depends on, you know, how we want to do it, how we want to fund it, between fund balance and, you know, some increase in the millage. So, anyway, that's my little sermon after
So what's your
12
proposal?
years.
What's your, I know you said a combination of fund balance and tax
Well,
increase.
I mean, my purpose was just to look at a little history and saying that, you know, we don't have a tough decision because we're in a good position. It's just how folks want to do it. I mean, with this situation of having a surplus and having a lot of money in the bank, I mean, I would want to keep, you know, any kind of increase in millage, you know, relatively small. You know, I mean, you know, I'd look at maybe a couple percent, but I don't know if you want to all other board members see where they're at. Because look, the difference between 2 and 3% is 65,000, or between 1 and 2%, or between 1 and 3% is 130,000. And obviously, you know, we have the money to do that. I mean, there is a position that, well, using fund balance, you know, you're going to have to cover that next year too. However, you know, with our history of surplus balances, which, you know, I would say the last 8 to 10 years, you know, our surpluses have averaged, you know, close to $1 million a year. Now, even if the permit fees tail off, you know, we still, you know, may have those kind of surpluses, not to that extent, but you still might have surpluses into the future. You know, remember, part of this was, you know, the part of the 1.1 was the 200 in expenses. And, you know, some of it was permit fees, but some of it was other areas too. I believe the interest played a part too. You remember off the top of your head, Steve? Don't.
Yeah, I think the interest this year was, if you'll recall, in December of last year, we asked if we could invest, I think about $1 million. And so we invested that $1 million, and we've just reinvested that $1 million. And so interest, we had budgeted thinking we were going to have about 60,000 based on what interest rates were at the time. And we ended up having about 200,000.
Yeah, so there's, you know, of the revenue side, 140,000 isn't permits, it's the interest. And there are other things besides development and permits that have fueled some portion of these surpluses. And you'd really have to look at all the line items on the revenue side to see that. So it's just, we can't say that it's all fueled by development. And even so,
I don't know if that's, I don't know if that's completely accurate. I'll jump in. Oh, I'll let you finish and I'll jump in.
well, I mean, I didn't say anything specific to be completely accurate. All I said was that the surplus,
then, right?
140,000 of the surplus fueled by one line item interest. A lot of it was, you know, from permits, and, you know, but basically, you know, the development over the years has certainly helped us. And we spent a lot of money, we invested a lot of money back in the township, as I mentioned, that was not invested before and should have been. I mean, our roads were, you know, not in great shape. You know, our vehicles weren't in great shape. Our staffing wasn't right. And we fixed a lot of that stuff. We spent a lot of money, and we still have, you know, money in the bank. So all I'm saying is we're in a good situation.
Understood. I'll just jump in because of the kind of the last comment, and I don't think for anyone's edification, anyone's interested in kind of going back and forth. So I guess each supervisor will speak. And then hopefully we'll have some sort of direction. I guess a couple of comments that I have is I agree with everything that Supervisor Partridge said with regards to where the township is today versus where it was in 2011 when he came onto the board. And the reason for that is he alluded to what I would say correctly is because of the leadership of the different boards and the management that Steve Neese has put forward with regards to being fiscally responsible and being conservative with regards to the budget. The development has obviously, as much as I disagree with all of it, has provided a benefit to the township with regards to the amount of permit fees that have come in, which is what, has thrown off the budgets a lot with regards to the surpluses. Then the township started taking that money and investing it in different areas, which were long overdue, whether it's the road program, whether it's the investment into the staff, whether it's the investment into the different services that the township residents deserve for a community of this quality. The fear that I have is the short-sightedness that some might look at in not acknowledging that parade of permit funds is never going to dry up. And I think that what we are going to see starting next year between the combination of the build out completing both at Lister and Ellis Preserve, and also just the way that the economy is going with lending right now, you're not going to see a lot of permits being pulled. You might see permits being pulled for small residential projects, but not nearly the magnitude of what we've experienced over the last 8 years, as Supervisor Partridge noted, with regards to the Ellis Preserve and with Lister. My fear of dipping into fund balance, time and time again, is that eventually that money, as I said, dries up. We have been able to allocate a lot of that to capital projects to kickstart some of the projects that the township has been discussing for a long time and starting a lot of the projects that residents have been noting that they've wanted for a long time. I mean, we just had a presentation here about the stormwater and how $8.1 million for just the first couple of projects is coming up. Now, whether we move forward with whether it's a fee, a tax, however we do it, or if we're funding those projects through capital, that's just an example. We talk about proper staffing and vehicle replacement in the road program. It took us years to get up to the levels that we are at now to be able to provide those services at that top high quality level. I'm not saying that the township needs to run a savings account. And that's not what I'm advocating for, and that's not what I'm looking to do. We get lucky year in year again by budgeting from a conservative perspective. Permits of a large magnitude are being pulled, and that's what throws a lot of this off. $140,000, that's nice, but they're pulling permits at a time for almost $1 million, $2 million. Some of those, the cost of those permits. I also think too, it's important for everybody to remember that when we talk about percentages, it looks so drastic. The high amount, 12.62%. Everyone sees 12%. They think, oh my goodness, the sky is falling down. 12.62% comes out to $111.56 a month for the average assessed home, which is $500,000 in this township, which is $9.30 a month, right? The low point, which people were noting before, maybe 2%, 3%, is $26.52 a year or $2.21 a month. So I think it's we throw numbers around, but at the end of the day, when we actually dig into it, I think it's important to highlight that we're still providing these high quality services. We're able to get we're pulling money back out for what we refer to as future savings or future investments, but I don't think it's necessary. I really don't. And my fear is that it might not come next year, but maybe it'll come the year after that or the year after that. But like I said, the permits which have been driving this will be drying up. And I think it's difficult for us to take money from fund balance again and start the year in a hole with that. Now, again, I'm only one, and I'm sure I'm on the minority of that. But I think that if we actually pull back the numbers, we can still have a lot of the things added back into the budget and a few other things, because it's really not that much of an expense when it all boils down. I understand people are struggling, prices are up, but if we want to continue to provide the high quality services that residents deserve in this community, I think we need to have an honest conversation on what the actual tax increase is. That's all I'll add.
To add to the chair's list of permits, that we also had a anomaly of transfer tax where we did not, that was not anticipated, correct, Mr. Neese? The transfer tax that we had over the last 2 years, all the right after COVID.
Yeah,
When-
we had a couple even just before COVID that we had not anticipated in regards to like Mainline Health sold,
Mhm.
and a few others that we had not planned on.
And
that-
some of the residential,
Yes.
that was happening with, because interest rates were so low. And I've been on the board now 10 years? No, yeah, because if you're here 9, I'm here 10. And Ed was in the trenches before me, and he had it really rough with the boards that he had to serve on, so I can appreciate what you had gone through. So it's just things to keep in mind, that the revenue stream, and we still are one of the lowest local tax, our tax bills for our municipality are still some of the lowest in the area, and the services that we provide. So it's just something else to add to that. So I don't know what I was getting at, but that was my point.
Steve, can I ask you a quick question? What is the, because I have the little sheet that talks about, what percentage equates to on a $500,000 assessed property, but what does each percent equate to in terms of revenue? Like in terms of, like if we were to if we were to take 1% out of fund balance, what is that number for each percent?
64,860.
64. Okay.
Six-
65. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just say, I sort of similar to Ed, I've spent 12 years on the school board dealing with similar issues. And so it's not new to me to understand the delicacy of trying to balance, increasing taxes versus, whether you should use fund balance and making sure that you have the appropriate amount of fund balance reserved, in order to run the township and provide services. So it's definitely a delicate situation that you really need to think about. I know that the chair said, that we shouldn't touch fund balance again, but we were okay last year allocating almost $550,000 worth of fund balance, and we didn't use it. We're not expected to use that. So it's not a matter of using fund balance again because we didn't use it last year. So, I understand that at some point you can't always budget based on, the fact that we'll continue to have these surges in permit fees or whatever it is, not 100% permit fees, but I also think that, now isn't the time with the way that costs are for everybody. Now isn't the time to, have a 12% tax increase. So, and I understand that it doesn't equate to, it might not equate to that much, on a $500,000 property to some people, but I think that it does equate to more than I think is fair, given the fact that we've had excesses. So I think it's a delicate balance, and I agree. I know it feels sort of arbitrary, but I do agree that I also think that with fund balance, if you can identify some capital needs, that you can use the fund balance for, then you're less likely to get into a hole, going forward where it becomes more of an issue. And I do think that we can do that here. So I think with a reasonable amount of fund balance and a reasonable tax increase, I think we can balance the budget, which is what I think we're supposed to be doing.
Maybe just one thing that, one thing when we discuss fund balance, Again, that's a savings account. It's not some sacred fund that you have to worry about touching. I mean, matter of fact, fund balance is manufactured. When we set the operating budget each year, and we say we're going to have 11 million of revenue and 11 million of expenses, and we have a balanced budget, and then we end up having, 11,500,000 in revenue and 10,500,000 in expenses. We've manufactured a million surplus that goes into the bank account, and that's called fund balance. So again, we determine what's in the savings account by the decisions that we make. So that's one point. And then the second point I want to make is that the permit fees, the transfer tax and all that, that's, one-time infusion. But my point was there's other things like the 200,000 excess, well, actually less, we predicted 200,000 more in expenses than we've actually incurred. That contributed to the 1.1 million surplus. The 140,000, as an example, in the interest contributed. There's other things besides transfer tax and permit fees, land development, that are contributing to this excess. So hypothetically, maybe the excess would have been $400,000 instead of 1.1 million. I don't know. That's just hypothetical. But the point is that we are in a good position. There's nothing to fear. Nothing to fear. We have a good fiscally sound, administration. And if we keep operating the same way, there's nothing to fear. So this decision, I mean, is really about, $65,000 per percent of increase, of which is a small amount of our surplus. So anyway, everything that our board members have said, is I'm not saying it's not accurate, but I don't think we have anything to be worried about with the way we've been running this township the last dozen years. All that said, I guess somebody needs to make a proposal, right?
Yeah, let me just add one thing, even though I said we won't do back and forth, so I just want to get this. Just with regards to the comment about the 2023 budget, that might be accurate, but I just want to be clear, I wasn't here for that vote, so I did not participate in that. So I guess that doesn't really apply to me. And then one thing I did want to just make clear with regards to the 12%, the reason why I was highlighting that is to show that when we say 12%, it doesn't mean we're talking about a massive amount of money for the services that we provide in this township, the average assessed house. It is just purely showing that it's $9.30 a month at the high end of that, which again, I understand is a struggle to some people. But it's when you look at it from that perspective, that's what I was trying to highlight. Where's yours? Yeah. Motion. Perfect on a motion.
All right, so let me just do this. Okay, hold on a second.
While you're thinking, can I just add a little bit of clarity to what you're doing? Remember, you are tonight voting to advertise the budget. And you want to advertise reasonably close to what you believe you're going to pass.
Right.
We have a little bit of leeway going either direction. You can always choose to save more money in the process. You can move within any one line item 25% or a total of 10% through either side of expenses and or revenue. So if you are close with where you want to be, but you're not all in agreement, you could come up with a number that you could all agree to for the purpose of advertising. And you could still get close to where you need to be. The reason for that is you need 20 days of it being open to the public. so that the public has a chance to come and see it. It will take us probably 2 days to put the final document together based on what you decide tonight. We would then advertise it, we would get it out, and then it would be available for the public to view. Our intent would be to vote on it at the December 13th meeting, would be when you are doing your final vote. So tonight, you're really setting for how we're going to advertise it, understanding that you still, if you want to take a little bit more of a bite at the apple, you can either way. And then, am I saying anything that's incorrect, Rich? So I just wanted you to make sure that you understand that whatever you decide tonight isn't necessarily the final budget. It should be accurate for where you want to be, but it doesn't have to be the final. Because you'll have public comment that comes in on that, and you'll have to respond to that. Yep. So I want to make sure everybody's clear where we are tonight with what I presented. There was a gap of 468,000. I just 920.
468.
And just so not saying that you're going to do this, just so everybody understands, that's a 7.23% increase. If you were to approve what I presented tonight, and that's what you wanted to advertise. And that uses $375,000 worth of fund balance based on 325 for the pension and 50,000 for the tree removal. So as you're making a decision, I just, as you direct tonight, whatever your motion is, I'm assuming you're using that as your base and that you're going to tell me which direction we're going from that, so I know how to.
I think
do that.
that I don't want to speak for the board, but I think the 468,920 is what the board is going to use as the base. I don't know if everybody agrees with that, but.
I was a little confused by some of the comments. That's why I'm bringing that
I
up.
think the 468,920 is what we were starting with, right?
Yeah, right.
Okay, all right. So we agreed on.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
And you said because of the timing, the advertising timing, that we need to vote to advertise today, right?
Well, let me say that if you want to act on December 13th, I need for you to I need you to give me direction for advertising today. If you want to be later in the month of December, we can, and I'll be here.
You want to have a special Christmas meeting?
Yeah, I have,
We could also do a special meeting.
we could do a special
We can do a
meeting.
special meeting the next week or.
Right, like if you needed time, we could come back next week and we could do that, and I would still have some time, and we could move the December meeting a week if you wanted to. So there's options. I don't want you to feel like we've handcuffed you if you want to do something different. The only requirement that we have is I have to advertise the budget 20 days prior to you acting on it. That is a requirement. The only other thing that I would say is if you got down and you weren't going to be able to get an agreement at the end of that 20 days, if you made a change to the budget and I had to re-advertise, I still need 10 days. And so we have to do that before the end of the year. We have to have a budget passed by December 31st. I will say my preference is not to be here on December 31st, but if need be.
Democracy in action.
Need 3 votes to get you where you need to be, right? All right.
I make a motion that we raise 3.5% increase. And the rest whatever to get, yeah. That's my motion.
So a motion was made by Supervisor Russo for 3.5% tax increase, which rough numbers. And fact check this, 227,500 in new taxes. New revenue, excuse me.
Again, so it's 3.5 times 65.
Yeah, all right,
Yeah.
so it's 227.5.
Yeah.
And
Roughly,
roughly, and then,
and then 240, 230, 240.
468, 920 minus.
Plus the
227.
300 and something.
No, that's already, we're not.
So 241,420 in fund balance, roughly.
It's about basically 50%.
Yeah.
Quick question for Rich. Rich, if somebody's making a motion, would it suffice that they say raise the millage 3.5% and the balance in fund balance? Would that suffice? Or do we need can Steve figure out the exact numbers later?
Based on the presentation.
Yes.
Based on the presentation.
1,920.
Would be 231,000.
We have.
Well,
Plus the 375.
I think I mean, if you're gonna put that motion on, then
Someone has to do something.
Well, it was seconded by Supervisor
Yeah.
Chanlis.
it's sitting there, so.
I thought we were waiting for the math calculations.
You just got.
Oh, can you give them to me one more time? Sorry.
Okay, so I'm gonna give you a couple of different numbers. The increase to the
Millage.
millage or increase the full state tax. $7,000.
Mhm.
We're going to increase fund balance use from 375. $41 and $41,009.
616.10.
9.
All right, so the motion was made by Supervisor Russo, seconded by Supervisor Chanlis. Everybody has those numbers. The township manager just read off. Do we want to do a roll call vote? Do we want to vote?
Roll call.
Okay, we'll do a roll call vote. Yeah, you know what? There is. Come on up, Larry. I'm really dropping the ball on my procedure tonight, Larry. Thanks for calling me out.
Larry Fisher, 3503 Rhodes Avenue. It's been a while. You know, it's just, last year it was $200,000. This year you're talking about $600,000. That's not one-time expense. That's a pretty big hole for next year. Well, you can increase, tell me if I'm wrong, Steve, the tax increase advertised could be higher. At the next meeting, they can lower it at the final meeting, right? At the final approval?
That is my understanding, although Rich and I talked, and the one thing is, we wouldn't want to go out and say we're doing a 7% increase if they have no intent. If there's no intent of the board to pass a 7% increase, that would be disingenuous of what they're trying to do. But if they said, we're going to look somewhere between 3 and 5,
Yeah.
and they were going to do that, we think that's okay, but that's where we would be.
But this, $600,000, is a big hole for next year, knowing, the economy is maybe slowing down, development is definitely slowing down. Like I said.
I think you have your public comment.
Any other public comment?
Alex, this again. I've been pushed up here. I was gonna wait till the end to make this comment, but I do respectfully, and I mean it respectfully, disagree with Mr. Partridge's comment. He said if we continue on the same track, everything will be fine. I'm confused a little bit by that statement based on what information that we got in the Finance Committee about the situation with the flooding that we discussed earlier. We were told in the committee, and I make no engineering, comments here. We were told that there was $8-point-something million of immediate need for projects to control flooding. And that was just a small chunk, that there was more, that this is a serious problem. And we were tasked with spending the time of coming up with a way to pay for that. And my concern is that if you took the 8-point-some million, all that surplus that you have, and used it to pay off the flooding issues, you wouldn't fix all the flooding issues. So if the money had been used, instead of just put in the surplus to address what we're told by the engineers is an engineering issue that the town faces right now, you would have no flooding, or at least less flooding, and no money in the surplus account. So it's almost like we chose not to do some projects, so we have lots of money left over. That's my concern.
Alex, question for you. Would you pay cash for the house, or would you take a mortgage on it? In other words, how would you fund it? Would you fund it would you use all your savings to fund it, or would you take on debt and pay it down little by little, especially if it's a one-time expense?
That's a decision for the board.
Right,
to
that's
make.
what I'm,
And we
I
would,
mean, no, but
personally, I
nobody's gonna
would,
take $8 million and out of the capital reserve and then spend $8 million for this problem. I mean,
no, and we weren't recommending that either.
Right,
But
no,
what
I
we
know.
were saying we have this money in surplus because we chose not to do certain projects over the years. And that's my point. And I think the town is in great financial. I don't have any issue with that. I just have issue, and I appreciate your service. I look forward to you sitting there with us.
We'll talk
But
more, yeah.
but we have to pay for, and this goes to what Leonard said, is we have to keep in mind that there's some big expenses coming down the pike that we have to be prepared to pay for. And I second Larry. I'm concerned about dipping into the fund balance to balance the budget when we really need the township to come together, and we all are going to have to pay for these big projects that we have sort of been pushing aside that seem to be getting worse and worse. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe that there's a revision to the motion.
I'm gonna revise my motion. I'm gonna revise my motion to say an increase of to advertise an increase of 4.5%, and the remainder will be from fund balance. So that'll be an increase of 292,500, correct, Mr. Neese?
Let me make sure before I,
Steve, when you give it to us,
Or I
give me
mean,
that full number, not just the increase. Meaning
468,920.
on top of the two.
After
Oh.
the 375, 468,920. That's what we're working from.
4.5.
That would be your 7.3.
I'm talking about the 4.5. You said 4.5.
Oh, he's gonna give him that number.
You just said that. That's what I just asked.
He's calculating it now.
I understand that. What I asked was, I don't know why you answered, but what I asked was, when he gives it to us, don't just add it on the 227. I was looking this way, you will do it for me.
so what am I doing? I'm sorry.
Just give us the number you have.
Okay,
After
so again, we had when we started the evening, I presented you a budget with a gap of 468,920.
Yep.
you are proposing that the motion is proposing that we would do a tax increase of 4.5%, which would increase our real estate tax revenue $291,870. That would leave a gap of $177,050 that would need to be added to our already use of fund balance of 375,000, which would make the new use of fund balance $552,050.
$552.50.
And what was,
Oh, of which the 50,000 is 50,000 of that use of fund balance was for one-time expense of the ash trees, the removing of the ash trees, and 375 was to help offset the increase of the pension. I'm not going to say that's one time because we may have to do that a couple years to get to where we need to be.
Steve, what was the use of fund balance that was allocated last year again? know we didn't-
I
we
don't
didn't use
recall
it,
the
but it was-
original,
Was it five?
but five,
Six.
I think 526.17 is what we got up to at this
Okay.
point of the year.
It wasn't 200, it was 500 last. year.
So
Well, I think we started out at a lower number and it got increased because we did some things that we didn't have revenues for at the time. We now have revenues that,
So since we're gonna ask that question, let me ask you this.
Yep.
The 526,017, what was the surplus the previous year?
I don't have that rate in front of me, but it's probably going to be about $1 million.
But so the 500,000 that you're talking, that Mike's motion would contemplate for this year is less than was allocated last year in terms of a fund balance.
It's less than what our current, actually, it's a little more because it was 526 for this year versus 550 for next year.
So
Is that what you're asking?
Oh, I
me?
thought you just said it was 500. What was the total?
what's the maximum differential you can do if we change our mind in December?
So in regards, let me ask you this question.
Is it 10% of the total number?
It is 10% of the total number, but if they wanted to.
It's $29,000.
Okay. Okay, so so I just was conferring, so if you're asking, I'm gonna make some assumptions that the two numbers that we would be playing with are either fund balance and or real estate tax revenue.
Yeah.
Real estate tax revenue, 10%,
$29,000.
huh?
Of that number is $29,000. It can move
If
either way.
you wanted to do, well, actually 10% would be 640,000. Like you could move 640,000 if you chose to, doing a 10% increase to real estate and you would still taxes.
Oh, so
and-
10% is like the percentage points, not of the number increase.
It's not of the number increase, it's of the total that was budgeted for that line item. So the total that's budgeted for that line item is between the discount and the penalty is 600 and it
All right,
would
so
be,
we can think about that now. It's fine.
does that make sense? And
We-
then
we-
Rich
we
has
have-
said,
We have a month to think about it.
if Rich has said that he thinks that for fund balance purposes, we could do more or less than that because that's not really changing a revenue line. It's using of your savings and he thinks we can do more. Is that correct?
But for now, it gives us a good starting point to think about it. You can advertise it.
Yep.
We can think about it and then we can come back. I don't think anybody's gonna change their mind right now in this time frame right here in the near 15 or 20 minutes, we could sit here more, but at least we have the ability to advertise and come back next month and talk about it again. I think.
Got one.
Like the taxes. So you can't
Yeah.
go the other way.
Well, you could pay up.
Any other board discussion? All right, Mr. Neese, when you're ready, can you do a roll call vote?
Oh, is that what we're doing? I'm sorry, I got.
That's all right. And just to be clear, this is on the 4.5% that Mr. Supervisor Russo amended
Yes,
to advertise,
to advertise. Yes, which it's one real quick, make sure I'm doing it, is 12.1 on the agenda. So I'm gonna just write
So
this.
it's
down.
just to advertise,
is
it's
just
not,
advertising.
not.
Yeah, you, all you're doing is that you're authorizing advertise, who's the second, by the way?
Supervisor Chandler.
Okay. So you're advertising, just make sure, I'm gonna repeat it back only because I want to make sure I'm doing the right thing.
Okay.
We are going to advertise the 2024 budget with a 4.5% tax increase, amounting to 291,870, and everything else that I had given you guidelines on this evening. And the only other difference is that we're increasing the use of fund balance by 177,000 to a total of 552,000. Does that, everybody's in agreement with what I'm doing?
Yeah.
All right. Ms. Roberts Lightcap,
To advertise, right?
it's to advertise, yes.
Keep it moving, yes.
Mr. Partridge,
No.
Mr. Russo,
Yes.
Ms. Chanlis, Mr. Altieri,
I'm gonna join in with Supervisor Roberts Lightcap just to keep this moving with regards to the next stage. Doesn't mean that I will ultimately be in favor of it, but just to get this advertised.
Okay.
Although, yes.
all right. I think we're clear what we need to do. It will probably, like I said, take us 2 days to make all the adjustments that we have to make to the documents so that we can get official documents available. We will post those on the web, on our webpage as a proposed budget. We will also put those in a position, they'll be available at the township building here upstairs in our office. And if Arlene's willing, I'll have a copy in the library as well. And it'll probably go in the paper like in 2 days so that we can meet all of our requirements. But I want to make sure we have our documents right before we do that.
Is there any public comment? Seeing none, meetings adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you all.